Welcome to today's episode of the Insurance, Life, and Everything in Between podcast. My name is Adam Brsan.
And I'm Chris Smith.
If you've yet to do so, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. And if you love this podcast, don't forget to share it with a friend or colleague. We greatly appreciate your help and support.
All right, welcome into the Insurance, Life, and Everything in Between Christmas, holiday, winter, whatever you want to identify as special. Now, Adam, we have 19 minutes this morning. We only usually spend about 25 minutes together in the mornings. And today we're going to talk about saying less things in the home. Like, I think a lot of times agents struggle because they just won't shut up and walk through the conversation. How's that sound for today's winter special conversation?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think you're right. I think sometimes people can talk themselves right out of a sale. I've seen it. I've trained agents. I've been in homes with agents where I just remember one time I was sitting with a guy and we were training. He went through the whole presentation. He went through the close. He gave the person 3 options and he pretty much said, "I'll let you tell me what's affordable." And she said, "Well, I think the 12,000 would be affordable." And then the next thing he said was, "Okay, so you want to go with the 12,000 then?"
Uh-oh.
And like right there, he opened it up to give that person more reasons to think it over a little bit. And I think I ended up having to kind of jump in to save it because, their conversation was kind of going to, "Well, you know what? Yeah, maybe I might have to get back to you." And all he had to say when she said, "I think the 12,000 would be affordable," all you need to do is throw in another closing question. For me, I usually I ask, "Who's your beneficiary going to be?" And then from there, that kind of transitions into them knowing too that we're starting to fill out the application. Some people might just say, "Okay, well, what's your middle initial?" And just something like that, they know that you're filling out the application. But you're right. Sometimes I think people say too much and they talk themselves right out of the house.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is having a set presentation so that there isn't any guesswork on what you need to say. From the first appointment to the last, from Monday through Friday, from whenever you're talking to someone, you're really saying the same thing to somebody. And then that creates a predictable pattern about what they're going to say in return, which leads you through an entire sales process. I think sometimes people talk too much because they just don't have that direction or structure to the presentation. I think the other part is as you said, transitional statements, making sure that when this happens, you can transition through this. Go ahead and get your ID, your driver's license, who's your beneficiary, something to carry that momentum over to the next step. If you don't have these kind of transitional statements, these are the kind of trainings and conversations and content that we talk about all the time. So if this is all brand new to you, hopefully that this rings a bell and connects you with us a little bit further. So when it comes to saying less things in the sale, I also think it's important that people understand that, or agents understand, that sometimes you can have small talk. Sometimes you can talk outside the sale, but sometimes you can just talk about stuff that's taking away from the sale. Adam, I think there's a fine line between warming up, building rapport, and talking about crap that just doesn't matter. Do you feel like sometimes you can inadvertently steer the conversation off course without even realizing it?
I think so. And I think sometimes people can talk themselves right out of a sale by saying too much or, just totally kind of getting off topic. And again, this is especially with the final expense. We're talking about something that's important that they need to make sure they understand the importance of it. And sometimes the client is the one who kind of can kind of get the agent off track with their presentation. But like what you said, Chris, when you have a presentation, you have a set presentation and you have a little bit of structure there, makes it a heck of a lot easier to kind of get back on point. And that's, my presentation, a lot of different, I call them closing questions. And those closing questions kind of go right through the presentation. And it's real easy to kind of get back on point when you have that structure. And I think it's important to get the client involved. I think it's important to ask those questions because if you're the one that's doing all the talking, a lot of times you can just kind of put the client to sleep. I like to get the client involved.
Yeah.
and make them kind of understand the importance of this. And honestly, by asking the right questions and getting the client involved, they end up selling it to themselves.
Exactly. It's got to be a conversation. It's got to be an interview per se. It can't just be one person doing all the talking. It's hard enough sometimes to keep Betty engaged in the conversation and on point with what you're talking about. If you're talking about something completely different, that's making it even worse. The next one that I have written down here when it comes to saying less things, I don't have a lot of things written down here, but to even stay on point, I like to write stuff down, is over explaining. I had a situation once where I was observing an agent. Ironic how these stories go, right? And I just want to see him present. Like, I want to see why he's having such a hard time closing business. Why is he having such a difficult time, helping people with something they know that they need? Why is it so hard to take 20 leads, door knock them, and find out why talking to somebody about dying and a solution to that problem is so difficult to him? And this someone doesn't work with us anymore. This is years ago, but I figured it out. Part of the reason why was he was over explaining things. Similar to what you were saying when that agent talked themselves out of the close, is they were making simplified issue life insurance not simple, complicated, confusing. And Adam, confused people don't buy, do they?
I don't think so. Yeah, you could definitely over explain it. I've always just been about keeping it simple. I mean, the client knows what it's about. If they have certain questions, it's good to address and answer them. But in the end, I mean, we don't need to go over every single little thing. Like, for instance, the contestable period. All of these policies, they have a 2-year contestable period. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that they're not covered for the first 2 years. That just means that if they were to pass away within the first 2 years, those companies, they have the right to go back to make sure that everything was answered accurately on the application.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to sit there and explain that whole thing to the client and tell them, well, yeah, you are covered immediately, but if you were to die within the first 2 years, it's going to take a little bit longer for the claim to pay out. Your family's going to have to come up with this and that and everything else. Like, I'm not going through all that, but I could see if someone does. I mean, yeah, that could be one sort of thing that would talk them right out of the sale.
Yeah.
We don't need to explain every single little detail of the policy. We just need to hit the important things that really matter.
Yeah, I think it was interesting in that same situation where this person was over explaining things. They pulled out this PDF and it had a chart that explained the differences between whole life and universal and term. And it's just that we have to keep the presentation so simple and how much I can like compact that conversation. When I would have 6, 7, 8, 9 appointments in a day, I didn't have time to say anything more than I needed to find out if they were going to buy or if they weren't, and then move on to the next person. So I think using appointments to kind of compact that time was a big learning experience for me too. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think that makes sense because if you without the appointment set, yeah, maybe you are spending a little bit too much time in a home. But if you know when you have somewhere you need to get to, and you're spending way too much time in that one house, sometimes you have to, but sometimes there's ways that that you can maybe speed it up a little bit, and it's not going to cost you anything.
Yeah. I mean, people only can digest so much information at a time. That's why short form content is so popular on social media. You stay after that 45-minute mark, the lower the quality of the business becomes. And I don't know why that is. That's hard to prove. But unless it's a unique, complicated situation, I mean, I can't even focus for an hour and a half without a snack. How is this client going to remember everything that happened?
I think everything is just so fast paced these days, and everything is just so nonstop. And yeah, I think that has something to do with it. Even with these phones and everything else, people are just, even like with like the TikTok and people watching the videos and just one after another, after another, after another, just scrolling. Like, yeah, they're not sitting there looking for half hour videos to watch.
No.
I just think that yeah, I don't know. People's attention spans are just uh, not what they used to be. I guess you could say.
Yeah, and the other part that's wild, I think sometimes is agents don't realize, especially maybe in the very beginning or when their confidence level is low, that maybe they think they're trying to be knowledgeable, but they are talking so much they've become a friend to the client, and they never become their client because they became their friend. and they almost get friend zoned out of the sale because, oh, it's all right, I'll just tell them no, and I'll tell them to come back next week, and I won't be there next week. And they don't feel like they've lost that friendly professional boundary between friend and insurance professional. Do you think some agents get friend zoned out of sales?
I think so. Where the rapport is really good, but then it could get to the point where the agent maybe is afraid to maybe get a little tough when they need to. When the person says, "Well, you know what? I'll just get back to you next week," and the agent just kind of says, "Oh, okay," and then they go out with the feeling of, "Wow, that was a really good appointment. I can't wait to go back and see them next week to write that business."
No.
And
Oh no, yeah.
follow up is so minimal in this business. It's like if you don't get it done when you're there, you got to almost treat it as though you're never going to see that person ever again.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of agents don't do. They just put it in their file of follow ups of people to call next week. And I mean, it's happened to me. You end up with some follow ups. Very seldom do I get anything out of them. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
you
But
really have to do whatever you can to try to make that sale. You don't want to be unethical about it, but you really need to do whatever you can to try to push to get that sale while you're there, and just have that attitude, that mindset that if I don't write this right now, I'm never going to see this person again.
yeah, I mean, the reality is that it's okay to kind of follow up on people you've already built some type of relationship with, like they've done business with you. That kind of follow up is the benefit of creating that initial client contact and business and planting that flag and gathering their information, and building the trust and selling something. But chasing somebody who told you no the first time, that's not follow up. That's looking desperate in many cases. I think following up on referrals because you're driving from one house to the next and you've got 15 minutes. So I'm working through a list of possible referrals. That's okay. But sometimes you have to know when to go and when to keep going. And that's a tough thing for a lot of people to learn. I even remember, Adam, when I was brand new, I had that same follow-up list. Like, I'm to get back to these people. And I got back to those people, and I learned very quickly how much time I wasted on people that just didn't want to do business with me. And I think that's okay to recognize. You're not going to close everybody, and that's okay too.
Well, yeah, and that's just why, we talk so much about it, kind of broken record, but just the importance of having that steady flow of leads on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Getting those referrals too is good. Referrals are going to make up for the people that say no, slam the door in your face, things like that. But yeah, it's just a matter of having more and more people to see, and just kind of knowing, like what you said, going in, you're not going to write every single piece of business. You got to do what you can while you're there, because you got to have, like I said, you got to have that mindset. You're never going to see that person ever again. But if you don't close it, just move on to the next.
Yeah.
Don't spend too much time trying to reconnect with that person, because the chances of doing business with them are pretty slim, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's some kind of power in that presentation if you do it properly. And once the show's over, the show's over. And it's hard to recapture that connection and that energy. And especially if you try to go back and recreate it, it may not work. What very practical tips could you give somebody who's out working, knocking, selling, and dialing because they need to keep working? What tips would you give them?
Well, this time of year, I mean, I would recommend, you know, trying to have those appointments set, but I always say, you can't just depend on the appointments. I mean, even right now for me, I mean, appointments have been minimal. I like to have a whole day's worth of appointments, but this time of year, it's just difficult. People are full of excuses. You can't depend on the appointments. It's a matter of doing the extra stuff, going back, dealing with existing policyholders. I think it's a great time of year for that. Uh, and then just door knocking the leads. Don't think about whether the person said yes or no, or what kind of disposition there was over the phone. If you do have an appointment set, or even if you were rejected over the phone,
Mm-hmm.
treat that lead. I always say treat it as though if they tell you no over the phone, that's just one no. They got to tell you no to your face too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what I mean by that, well, even if they reject you over the phone, you put that in your stack of leads to door knock when you're out in the field. And so many times they're not even going to realize it's the same person that they rejected over the phone. Don't say anything about you calling them. They're not going to know the difference. But I've written plenty of business that way. So many times people are just pre-programmed to say no over the phone. They just think you're a telemarketer. They're just ready to just reject you. But then you show up and they're the nicest person in the world, and you do business with them.
Yeah, it's interesting in those situations where we just have to recognize what we're there for, what we have to do, and go out and do it. And I think we have to get out of our heads, get out of our homes, get into the field, and get moving. Like, the world's problems are not going to solve themselves by sitting here and looking at them. Your bank account isn't going to get any bigger by filling out another carrier contract for another company you're not going to sell. You know, the grass isn't any greener than the grass that you personally water and try to nurture into what it is. And it's nobody else's fault but yours. I mean, I think that's the hardest truth I've heard and learned, and the most powerful thing I've heard a failed agent say. You know, this guy rolled that to me, but he said it to me. He's like, a lot of problems are you problems. And he was talking about himself. I'm like, well, that's perfectly correct. You've created a lot of problems that never got a chance to fix. But we all need to recognize that most of the things in this industry are within our control to change. Some of the things we can't do anything about, and we can't allow those things to slow us down. But if you're out working today, you're out working during the end of the year, you're doing better than most. You're doing more than most. And if you just keep doing that, you're going to win. So, Adam, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to pre-record today's winter Christmas holiday special with those that are watching. Keep working, keep trying, keep putting the effort in. And if you're out there without any kind of guidance or support and you need people to connect with, reach out to us. We'd be happy to work with you. Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. And this concludes another episode of the Insurance, Life, and Everything in Between podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend or colleague. And if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, please leave those too. Any input is greatly appreciated. Thank you.